I saw them as more like annoyances and things that really didn't affect me much, but you know, I'll be aware of them and let me get into the real stuff. Until I really understood what the Buddha taught hindrances, why he taught them is because they are just that. Hindrances are obstacles for developing the Dhamma. And so if I'm confronted with something that's an obstacle to where I want to get to, I have to deal with it, don't I? I can't just make believe it's not there or it's going to stay there. And also, obstacles or hindrances are not something that we should overanalyze or embrace or cultivate. And the reason why I say that is there's a whole wing of modern Zen practice that teaches the hindrances in just that way, especially doubt, but any and all of them. Doubt is often taught that we should cultivate doubt. We should embrace doubt. We should join with doubt. All of that is part of eye-making, isn't it? It's part of conceit. The thinking in that way of thinking in that school, which is called the, we get too deep into this, most of the Zen schools and even some of the other Tibetan schools came from something called the mind-only school or the Yogacara school, which put an emphasis on meditation alone as a way of developing awakening. And so doubt was introduced into that way of thinking, is that we should get in so deeply into our doubt and be focused on it to the point of extreme frustration with the belief that if we can do that to ourselves, our minds will explode into awakening. And I appreciate the response because I hope to hear that response from people that know better, but understand that is the modern way of looking. Most people look at meditation, or that it's at least a technique to develop a blank slate where you're not aware of any thoughts, a trance-like state. The Buddha never taught anything like that. And he taught hindrances as not something that we should cultivate or embrace, but to recognize and abandon. And then in this particular sutta, the Buddha teaches us what we do to directly sustain or provide sustenance for these hindrances and how to starve the hindrances, feeding and starving them. And in the same sutta, the Buddha then teaches us how to provide sustenance for the 7 factors of awakening that we talked about before. The 7 factors of awakening are mentioned often, particularly in the Satipatthana and the Anapanasati Sutta and the Galana Sutta, but they are the 7 factors for awakening. In other words, the Buddha didn't teach 5, and he didn't really teach 9. He taught 7. And he taught 7 factors that are to be fed or sustained or cultivated. Okay, let me get into the sutta. And so you can, by teaching this in this one sutta, it's called the Ahara Sutta, the Buddha is making the direct point that if you don't deal with the obstacles, you can't expect the benefits of the 7 factors of awakening because they are obstacles to developing that. Friends, today I will teach you the feeding and the starving of the 5 hindrances and the feeding and starving of the 7 factors of awakening. Listen and pay close attention. I would if he was talking. You should do that for me too, by the way. Feeding the 5 common hindrances to fully developing the Eightfold Path, the subtitle here. And they're common hindrances. Everybody has them. They were prevalent during the Buddha's time. They're still here. Friends, there are 5 hindrances that overwhelm mindfulness and weaken wise discernment. We don't want these. Sensual desire is a hindrance that overwhelms mindfulness and weakens wise discernment. Sensual desire is fed by becoming enamored with impermanent objects, events, views, and ideas due to inappropriate attention. Again, I say this often, but you could say that the entire Dhamma is in that one paragraph, in that one sentence. Because if we recognize that any type of sensual desire is rooted in ignorance of 4 noble truths and fueled by continued eye-making, I want, if we continue to feed that by a distracted mind grasping after everything that attracts it, we don't have a chance, do we? And very specifically, now that the Buddha's teaching a very general teaching here, a very general application, but also when in the context of his Dhamma, it's very specific. that if we allow sensual desire to motivate the incorporation of different practices because they make me feel good or they're maybe a subtle form of distraction, that's really what the Buddha is talking about. Keep your Dhamma practice pure. Don't let it be distracted by sensual desire. And that last line, inappropriate attention. Mindfulness means to recollect or to hold in mind. So we can do that with anything, including for 2.5 weeks, I practiced Amitabha Buddhism, which is a type of Buddhism where you learn this one specific chant and you just say it over and over and over again with a hope that when you die, that chant will be on your lips when you take your last breath. And if so, you'll be transported to Amitabha Buddha heaven, where you'll be taken care of by Amitabha Buddha forever and ever and ever. Sounded great. And again, I did it religiously for 2 weeks until I realized this is pretty foolish. I don't think I'm going to do it anymore. But it was that sensual desire that I could find a shortcut to awakening that fueled that whole foolishness. I shouldn't call it that. Excuse me. People that practice that, but that's how I look at it anyway. That's inappropriate attention. The Buddha continues. This is food for the arising of sensual desire and for the increase of sensual desire that has arisen. And again, that line, inappropriate attention, is a euphemism for wrong mindfulness or inappropriate mindfulness. Ill will is a hindrance that overwhelms mindfulness and weakens wise discernment. Ill will is fed by reacting with irritation to impermanent objects, events, views, and ideas due to inappropriate attention. Again, what we're holding in mind fuels ill will. It could be just a prejudice that we've developed against our next door neighbor because of whatever they cook smelly potatoes first thing in the morning. So we're always angry when we see that person because that's what's in mind. So no matter how pleasant we try to act, we always leave that. I should have told them today about those smelly potatoes. It's a silly but that's what this means. That's I mean, ill will causes world wars, doesn't it? But it's at this very subtle level that keeps that tension in society going, doesn't it? These very subtle levels of ill will. And they form by inappropriate attention, by holding something that is inappropriate in mind, such as those stinky potatoes. This is food for the arising of ill will and for the increase of ill will that has arisen. So the initial judgment that I don't like that person because they make these smelly potatoes in the morning is rooted in what? It's rooted in ignorance of the way things are. Why? What's the perfect example? Because the guy's cooking potatoes in the morning. And guess what? He's got a right to do that. No matter how stinky they are, I'm the one that's reacting to that, aren't I? And if I hold it against him, it's because I expect another human being to be different than I want them to be. Do you hear all the arrogance in that way of thinking? Even it could be right, a right view. Somebody's really doing something that is, forget about the potato metaphor, anything that could be seen as distracting in that way. But it's my judgment that makes it an irritation to me. It doesn't, it's not a fact of, or an act of making something right or wrong in my own view. The problem is my reacting to it, that I want something to be different. And that's really what I'm getting at. And so I'm holding in mind this fabricated view that I should only have pleasant smells in my life, going back to this analysis. Of course, that's not possible, is it? Because there's wonderful smells and there's also putrid smells. That's part of life. And the putrid smells are just as much a part of life as the rosy smells. They're just there. If I can learn to not insist that life be different than it is, I maintain a calm and peaceful mind and a clear view of what's occurring. So I kind of roundabout analogies there, but I made the point. Okay. That's ill will. Laziness and drowsiness is a hindrance that overwhelms mindfulness and weakens wise discernment. Laziness and drowsiness are fed by indifference, boredom, weariness, particularly after a meal. Interesting, the Buddha needed to put that in. And the general indifference to impermanent objects, events, views, and ideas due to inappropriate attention. So this smug indifference that we often try to develop as a reaction to the difficulties in the world, I don't let anything bother me. Well, that's not a peaceful mind, is it? In fact, it's a very protective mind against reacting that only fuels reaction, doesn't it? You may not show it. You may become very skilled. In fact, we know people like that, don't we? We talk about people that keep everything bottled in. But yet they may feel, in fact, people that feel the need to do that, like I was for many years, feel that they're actually doing something worthwhile by holding it all in. Expressing it is not the answer, even though we're often taught, well, you got to let that stuff out. Well, you probably should. But better still is to not have the fabricated mind that creates that reaction in the first place. Because once we get to that point, we are, in effect, mindless, but we're holding in mind things that are only going to cause suffering for us. The Buddha's teaching this very specific understanding of these hindrances for just this reason, because they're common. They're so common that they're subtle, and we tend to excuse them away as a reasonable response or reaction to what's occurring. And oftentimes, that would be a correct view, except we're missing the point that it's creating an agitation and distraction in my own mind. In other words, we can justify reasonably within a societal structure that certain behavior is better if it doesn't occur. But the wise understanding is that behavior does occur in the world. It's best if it doesn't occur within me, because that's the only behavior that I can really change. But also, by being that example, I can hope to change others. But if I'm always telling people, you know, your behavior is no good, you got to act like this, nobody's going to change. I mean, that's never affected change in anybody. And we can look at ourselves. Has that ever happened to us, to ourselves? Did somebody tell us that you're acting in a way that's hurtful, and we just immediately stopped it? I don't think it happens often. I know it never happened with me. I tend to hold on to those kind of things and justify it because of the world I live in. This is food for the arising of laziness and drowsiness, and for the increase of laziness and drowsiness. So if we don't want to do that, we will withhold the sustenance towards it. I was just reading my comments. I think I'll pass them. Restlessness and anxiety is a hindrance that overwhelms mindfulness and weakens wise discernment. Restlessness and anxiety are fed by a lack of concentration, meaning the concentration necessary to support the refined mindfulness of the Eightfold Path. This is food for the arising of restlessness and anxiety, and for the increase of restlessness and anxiety that has arisen. So if we find ourselves restless, which often manifests, I mean, they're all, restlessness and anxiety are kind of the same thing. Restlessness would often manifest as some type of worry. I just can't sit quietly. My mind is distracted by this and that event. Even if the events aren't clear, we go from one to the next. And that type of uncontrolled mindlessness often leads to clinical anxiety. And what is anxiety? Anxiety is a very well-focused look on the future that is holding me out of something that's going to get hurt. And because we keep rehashing that view in relation to the world, it leads to clinical anxiety. And I'm not saying that the Eightfold Path is enough to cure that. Many people need additional help. I always say that just to qualify that. Don't just think you're going to meditate and everything's going to be fine. But in the right framework and with the right practice, anxiety is greatly relieved, and so is restlessness. But if we just ignore it, including medication, by the way, if we just, and again, sometimes medication is necessary just to function in the world. And if we do, please take it. But medication is not a solution to restlessness and anxiety. It's a way of coping in the world, and sometimes an important method of coping, but it's not what we're talking about here. The Buddha, again, is putting such emphasis on recognizing restlessness and anxiety as an aspect of wrong mindfulness, inappropriate attention. And it's because of that inappropriate attention that we're feeding it, and we continue to feed it. Is that clear through each one of these? let me just, I don't think I've finished this. This is food, a lack of concentration. This is food for the arising of restlessness and anxiety and for the increase of restlessness and anxiety that has arisen. So a mind that is rooted in restlessness and anxiety and worry, when that mind comes to meditate, it is distracted by that. So the counter would be concentration, isn't it? The counter isn't figuring out where your restlessness and anxiety came from and going through years of therapy. And again, if people are doing that, that's fine. But as far as the Buddha is concerned, the solution is concentration. And that makes perfect sense, doesn't it? If my mind is distracted by worry, let me learn to concentrate. And now I've taken control of my mind. That's right mindfulness. I'll go too far into that. You don't want to stretch metaphors too far. Uncertainty and doubt is the same thing. Uncertainty is a hindrance that overwhelms mindfulness and weakens wise discernment. Uncertainty is fed by clinging to impermanent phenomena, and clinging to it to remain permanent once we've self-identified with it. This is food for the arising of uncertainty and for the increase of uncertainty that has arisen. Again, uncertainty and doubt. And uncertainty is an aspect of impermanence, isn't it? Because everything is always changing, we can never be certain what the next moment is going to bring. And we should, rather than embrace that doubt, we should simply understand it. That's what's occurring. And no matter how many times we are in a particular situation, that's no guarantee that that same situation is going to be experienced the same way by me. Why? Because my thinking may have changed. And so therein lies step 3. If it wasn't for impermanence, there would be no way to change the way we think, would there be? Because this ultimately comes down to what I'm holding in mind. That's mindfulness. But because everything is always changing, including because of the framework of the Eightfold Path, my view of myself in relation to the world, I can take advantage of this moment and keep my mind inclined towards awakening. In other words, I can starve the hindrances that were identified, and I can begin to feed the 7 factors of awakening. The 7 factors of awakening to fully developing the Eightfold Path. And this is in the same sutta, by the way. These 7 factors of awakening are well expounded and cultivated and fully developed by one awakened. They bring perfect understanding, full realization, and nibbana or nirvana, which is, when the Buddha is using that term, he's using that term as it was originally intended, meaning extinguished. Now nirvana or nibbana means a Buddha heaven, and that could have any description to it. But the Buddha just simply means you've recognized and abandoned all views rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths. You've extinguished those wrong views. What are these 7? So these are the factors of enlightenment that we want to feed. Mindfulness is a factor of enlightenment. Mindfulness is carefully taught by the Buddha. Every time I've read, I shouldn't say every time, there's probably times when I didn't, but most of the times I've read the Buddha's words in reference to mindfulness, he includes that word there. I carefully teach this, which is emphasizing it's a very specific and well-focused type of mindfulness. It's a mindfulness that means we hold in mind each factor of the Eightfold Path. Mindfulness is carefully taught by the Buddha. What is the food for the arising and increase in mindfulness as a factor of awakening? Mindfulness is fed by the mental qualities of jhana or concentration. Jhana is concentration, is the foothold and foundation that sustains the entire Eightfold Path. It's also what we need to do when restlessness and anxiety start overcoming, doesn't it? Or any of the other factors. It all rests on that concentration practice. Mindfulness is cultivated. In other words, it doesn't just happen because we want to be mindful. Mindfulness is cultivated and fully developed by one awakened. And of course, that means through the Eightfold Path. Mindfulness brings perfect understanding, full realization, and nibbana. Investigation of the Dhamma is a factor of enlightenment. We have to investigate. We have to spend some time learning what it is. It's not just meditation. Investigation of the Dhamma is carefully taught by the Buddha. And what is the food for the arising and increase in the investigation of the Dhamma as a factor of awakening? Feeding the investigation of the Dhamma is remaining mindful of the mental qualities that are skillful and unskillful, blameless and blameworthy, refined or gross, inclined towards understanding, or inclined towards further ignorance. Investigation of the Dhamma is cultivated and fully developed by one awakened. Of course, understanding what is skillful and unskillful, blameless and blameworthy is framed by the Eightfold Path. That's the path the Buddha taught to be able to develop this type of wise but very simple discernment. We all know the difference between, well, maybe we don't. Let me correct that. When we first begin Dhamma practice, we may be confused about what is skillful and unskillful. We may think that endless chanting is skillful because somebody taught me that. And so it took me a while, and even some other ritualistic practice, it took me a while to recognize that these were wholesome practices, but that didn't necessarily translate to being skillful practice as far as developing the skill necessary to integrate the Eightfold Path or blameworthy, etc. Investigation of the Dhamma brings perfect understanding. In fact, I could, and I thought about adding a line, adding the word, investigation of the Dhamma should bring, as a way of gauging, are you engaging in right Dhamma practice? Does it feel like it's developing what it should be developing? But I'll use the words of the Buddha. Investigation of the Dhamma brings perfect understanding, full realization, and nibbana. Persevering effort is a factor of enlightenment. We have to keep going. The word, there's a Pali word for that called kashanti, and it just means that, to be fully engaged and to continue. When those days come along and we just don't feel like meditating, or we really don't even feel like even considering right speech or right whatever it might be, that's the time to practice. That's when we can engage in kashanti and persevering effort, when we don't feel like it. It's the best time. Persevering effort is carefully taught by the Buddha. And what is the food for the arising and increase in persevering effort as a factor for awakening? Persevering effort is fed by remaining mindful of the cultivation of right effort. There's the sixth factor of the Eightfold Path, right effort, is a reminder towards persevering effort. It's included in the path. Keep going. Persevering effort is cultivated and fully developed by one awakened. Persevering effort brings perfect understanding, full realization, and nibbana. Joyful engagement in the Dhamma is a factor of enlightenment. And it's so important, it seems obvious that once we realize that we've discovered something that can truly bring lasting peace and happiness to us as individuals, that should foster joy, shouldn't it? And joyful appreciation for this. That doesn't mean it might wane at times. We're not so joyful about our Dhamma practice, but to remember, to hold in mind that, yes, I should be joyful about this because I know where it's taking me. And to cultivate it, to bring it back into mind, and to treat your engagement with the Dhamma from that joyful state of mind. We should always engage in it that way. It doesn't mean that if we don't, we're doing something wrong, but it's not gonna feed our Dhamma practice, is it? If I'm doing it grudgingly. And that can happen, just to go a little bit further. That type of Dhamma practice that we engage in it reluctantly or grudgingly at times even, it's because, and this may be on a very subtle level, we're engaging in Dhamma practice, but it could be any practice, to fix a broken self, or because we think there's something missing or wrong with me. And that practice will always be felt like with reluctance and begrudging that practice. Because what are we doing? We're actually just reinforcing the fact that I don't think much of myself. And that really is the underlying, and I don't want to get too deep into this. I've been writing this book for 2 years, but I can't get it clear enough to publish it. But that really is the underlying issue in the world, is this very subtle, often subtle, not always, form of self-loathing that there's something wrong with me. And even if we think that on just a little level, It's a fabricated view. In other words, there's great gradations of that among people, isn't there? And I think we all know people that really do just hate themselves. But that's all part, the extreme version of aversion is hate, isn't it? But it's all part of aversion, which is part of craving, which is, craving is an act of wanting something to be different. And in that way, it's craving that I be different, that I measure up because I don't right now. And that is where that type of begrudging attitude comes from. But guess what? If we have it, we can feed the other aspect of joyful engagement with the Dhamma. We can, I don't want to say automatically, but very quickly put that aside, at least as far as our Dhamma practice is concerned, because we understand what we're doing. We found something to put all that type of subtle and not so subtle self-loathing aside, just abandon it. And I don't know why I'm using these words, but come into agreement with who we really are. Because the other way is not in agreement with who we are. It's always fighting. That's that subtle tension. That's where the dukkha really arises, from that subtle tension of insisting that I'm something that I'm not. How do I know what I'm not? Read the Dhatu Vibhanga Sutta, because that's very clear. So, we're just 6 properties. That's all any human being is or ever can be.
So what I'm hearing you say is that you can't really conquer craving. You just have to.
I would say with a head-on assault, you
act
can't.
In spite of it, or you're really like, even though it's occurring, you're not acting on it, or you're not.
Yes. And it's almost like that.
But
if you're not,
can't be like mad at the craving. It has to be, I'm just gonna.
Yeah. If you're judging yourself harshly because you notice some craving,
yeah,
that's part of this self-loathing, just to put that label on it. And I think it fits.
Right.
And it's a form of eye-making, isn't it? So again, there's this subtle thing, and I kind of realized this maybe 20 years ago, but I was surprised when I had the thought, that we are taught, and this was mostly in the West. In other words, years ago, not that many years, 15 years ago, in most of Southeast Asia, if you said the word self-loathing, they couldn't understand it because they didn't have a reference for why anybody would think any less of themselves in any way. They just couldn't understand that. And so it was really just a part of the West, because we use it as a way of learning, don't we? We first say that there's something that we don't know or that we need to change. We beat ourselves up often about that. And then we feel like that's motivation to change, finding out what's wrong. And we teach our children, unfortunately, that way too, don't we? Often. Mm-hmm. It's changing, because I think we're realizing how inefficient that is. But yet that's really been the model. So we've conditioned ourselves to think that if we want to better ourselves, and anybody that comes to this type of practice is doing it for that reason, whatever the underlying motivation is, it is to better ourselves. But we could fall into that trap then, couldn't we? That I'm bettering myself because there's something wrong, rather than I'm just gaining the knowledge of an awakened human being, which is a different motivation, isn't it? And I'm letting go those old views of self-loathing that were so prevalent in my life. That's all it is. So the head-on assault doesn't work, does it? But the ignorance of it doesn't work either. This is, again, the brilliance of the Buddha. He understood that he couldn't just say, you people are all ignorant and you're full of craving, stop.
Right. No, right. Yeah.
Because it's laughable, but it's also beyond silly, because it's actually hurtful. That's a lot of what modern spiritual practice is taught that way, isn't it? That this is the way human beings should be. This is an enlightened society. Act that way or there's something wrong with you. And since most people can't act that way, especially all the time, again, it's just reinforcing that belief that I can't be happy and smiling and compassionate and loving all the time. Nobody can. But we're taught that we should be that way. We're entering this great new age of Aquarius, where peace will prevail and our minds are all one. And what happens when we take that on and then we don't see it in the world, or we don't see it in ourselves? Yeah, something's wrong. And then we might develop that thinking so far where now we're not just in disagreement with people that don't think like me. I'm right and everybody else is evil.
So you need to just accept yourself as you are, Move on. Don't beat yourself up over it.
Yes.
Try to live by the Eightfold Path. And when you trip up, you trip up.
Yeah, we're done for today. That was beautiful. Really. And that is that last part you said, Mary, when you trip up, you trip up. And it's not even you tripped up, so what? It's just take another breath. That's not even here anymore, is it? And understand that the opportunity that you just gave yourself to recognize that you tripped up and you didn't beat yourself up on it provides the opportunity for in the next moment to let go of it. But if you fell into the trap, at first I have to analyze it, figure out where it came from. I have to whip myself 100 times.
So that I won't do it again. I have to make sure that I understand.
Yeah. And it's just, it is mindless, isn't it? We try to cause so much pain for ourselves thinking that there's benefit in it. When the Buddha, I read this, when I first read this, I didn't quite understand it. When the Buddha talks about, I think it's in the Dukkha Sutta, but he says this often in many other suttas, that we join with our suffering. We do, don't we? We do, and we gain all kinds of perceived benefits from our suffering, like learning. I gotta be careful how I say this. Many religions are based on accepting suffering because we'll get rewarded for it later. And most religions are some manifestation of that. Mm-hmm. When the Buddha recognized, wait a minute, suffering is caused by my actions, my thoughts, words, and deeds. I don't need an outside agency to end that. I just have to understand myself. And notice also where that view is going from the outside world is the problem and the way I'm acting in that world to bringing it back to where it makes sense. This is where the issue of ignorance lies, isn't it? It's not out there. It's manifested out there by other people. But the only ignorance I can do anything about it resides within me. And if I can feed these 7 factors of awakening, I can end that. I better keep going. Finish this. What is the food for the arising and increase in joyful engagement as a factor of awakening? Joyful engagement in the Dhamma is fed by remaining mindful of the mental qualities of concentration and refined mindfulness that cultivate and increase joyful engagement in the Dhamma. Joyful engagement in the Dhamma is cultivated and fully developed by one awakened. Joyful engagement in the Dhamma brings perfect understanding, full realization, and nibbana. I'm skipping over some of my comments. Tranquility is a factor of enlightenment. Tranquility is carefully taught by the Buddha. What is the food for the arising and increase in tranquility as a factor of awakening? There is physical tranquility and mental tranquility. Physical tranquility, we do that every time we begin to meditate, isn't it? We first bring our body to a silent, restful state. Then the mind follows. Tranquility is fed by remaining mindful of the mental qualities developed through the Eightfold Path. Tranquility is cultivated and fully developed by one awakened. Tranquility brings perfect understanding, full realization, and nibbana. When the Buddha talked about the quality of mind of an awakened human being, he used that word tranquility or calm or at peace. Concentration is a factor of enlightenment. Concentration is carefully taught by the Buddha. What is the food for the arising and increase in concentration as a factor of awakening? Concentration is fed by developing the 4 foundations of mindfulness. Concentration is cultivated and fully developed by one awakened. Concentration brings perfect understanding, full realization, and nibbana. Now remember from the Satipatthana Sutta, the sutta on the 4 foundations of mindfulness, that sutta, the Buddha first teaches us how to meditate. That's the 4 foundations of mindfulness. And then the rest of the sutta is about how to apply that concentration supporting the refined mindfulness to the rest of the different themes of the Dhamma, all resting in concentration. Equanimity is a factor of enlightenment. Equanimity is carefully taught by the Buddha. What is the food for the arising and increase in equanimity as a factor of awakening? Equanimity is fed by remaining mindful of the framework and guidance of the Eightfold Path. So if we want to develop equanimity, we develop the Eightfold Path. Nothing ambiguous about what the Buddha taught Equanimity is cultivated and fully developed by one awakened. Equanimity brings perfect understanding, full realization, and nibbana. These 7 factors of enlightenment are carefully taught by the Buddha, and all 7 are cultivated and fully developed by one awakened. Feeding these 7 factors of enlightenment brings perfect understanding, full realization, and nibbana. Now, I want to conclude this, and I'm going to do it a little bit quickly, try to keep my comments down. But if you have a question about that, please let me know. Starving the 5 hindrances. Now, what denies sustenance for the arising and increase of sensual desire? Mindful development of the understanding of the practical unattractiveness of all impermanent objects, events, views, and ideas. This denies sustenance for the arising of sensual desire and for the increase of sensual desire. Was that clear? It's a little bit wordy, but mindful development of the understanding of the practical unattractiveness of all impermanent objects, events, views, and ideas. It just means that we start releasing the clinging that we have to the people and events of our worlds and the things that we have.
I mean, I love the way he uses the word practical.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because it's unpractical.
It is. And the practical and pick something. You know, you if you look at, there's nothing in the world that we can look at from right view and not see the unattractiveness aspect of it. And that doesn't mean, I don't know why I'm thinking about my dog right now, but he is the most wonderful dog in the world. But every now and then he's a little unattractive. He does something and we can find that in anything, can't we? And in that way, we're beginning to become dispassionate and disenamored with things. It doesn't mean that we don't appreciate things. In fact, we'll appreciate things more because we'll be more fully understanding of what we're dealing with. We're not expecting things to be any different than they are. It's equanimity, seeing things clearly. And what denies sustenance for the arising and increase of ill will? Developing the understanding of release from ignorance and the development of wise compassion, empathetic joy, and equanimity. Makes sense, doesn't it? What the Buddha is really saying is, as a natural consequence of developing the Eightfold Path with fidelity, ill will naturally falls away. In fact, he's really saying that to all of these things. This denies sustenance for the arising of ill will and for the increase of ill will. And what denies sustenance for the arising and increase of laziness and drowsiness? Remaining mindful of the framework and guidance of the Eightfold Path. This denies sustenance for the arising of laziness and drowsiness and for the increase of laziness and drowsiness. And what denies sustenance for the arising and increase of restlessness and anxiety? Remaining mindful of the development of a calm and tranquil mind. This denies sustenance for the arising of restlessness and anxiety and for the increase of restlessness and anxiety. So restlessness and anxiety can often drive you away from your Dhamma practice. The Buddha is teaching, what do you do with it? Remain mindful of the development of its counter, a calm and peaceful mind. You have to do this. And what denies sustenance for the arising and increase of uncertainty? Remaining mindful of the mental qualities that are skillful and unskillful, blameless and blameworthy, refined or gross, inclined towards understanding the Four Noble Truths, or inclined towards further ignorance. Again, using the Eightfold Path to bring our concentrated mind into that refined mindfulness that's holding in mind the Eightfold Path. Excuse me. Starving the 7 factors of awakening. This is the end of the sutta. And so what is the denial of sustenance for the arising and increase in mindfulness as a factor of awakening? What's the obstacle to not developing this? Not developing concentration, not developing jhana. Again, incredibly practical teaching, isn't it? Where we could, anybody, the Buddha included, could get into a long-winded explanation of how we get to that place and analyze all the factors that are included. All we need to know is that it's a lack of concentration. And the Buddha didn't stop there, did he? He taught us the most powerful meditation method for developing concentration and the right framework. The Buddha continues, not developing jhana, deny sustenance to establishing the foothold and foundation of the Eightfold Path. If we don't have a right meditation practice, we can't hope to develop the rest of the path. What is the denial of sustenance for the arising and increase and investigation of the Dhamma as a factor of awakening? Who would think that? What denies the sustenance for the arising and increase in investigation of the Dhamma as a factor of awakening? Who's got an answer?
Concentration?
Lack of concentration.
Almost.
Denies the sustenance.
Ignorance of the mental qualities that are skillful and unskillful. Maintaining ignorance. The only thing we have to be concerned. Come back to the Eightfold Path. Let me read the whole thing because it does explain this a little. What is the denial of sustenance for the arising and increase in investigation of the Dhamma as a factor of awakening? Continued ignorance of the mental qualities that are skillful and unskillful, blameless and blameworthy, refined or gross, denies sustenance for the arising and increase in investigation of the Dhamma as a factor of awakening. Sustenance for investigating the Dhamma is denied by a quality of mind that is distracted from understanding Four Noble Truths and distracted towards further ignorance. One of the, I think, most profound things that I've seen from sitting here is the very powerful and very subtle strategies that we all employ to continue to ignore ignorance. And that's what the Buddha is addressing here. What is the denial of sustenance for the arising and increase in persevering effort as a factor of awakening? Sustenance for the development of persevering effort is denied by ignoring the right effort necessary for developing the potential for awakening and establishing the Eightfold Path. Again, you could say these are all aspects of ignorance too, aren't they? What is the denial of sustenance for the joyful engagement in the Dhamma as a factor of awakening? Sustenance for the development of joyful engagement in the Dhamma is denied by ignoring the mental qualities of concentration and refined mindfulness that cultivate and increase joyful engagement in the Dhamma. In other words, if you want to develop joyful engagement in the Dhamma, develop the Dhamma. What is the denial of sustenance for developing tranquility as a factor of awakening? Sustenance for the development of tranquility is denied by ignoring the mental qualities that support tranquility developed through the Eightfold Path, just simply not developing the path. What is the denial of sustenance for developing concentration as a factor of awakening? Sustenance for the development of concentration is denied by ignoring or misapplying the four foundations of mindfulness. I put that in parentheses, or misapplying, because I very rarely heard a correct translation or interpretation of the Satipatthana Sutta. Again, usually the Satipatthana and the Anapanasati Sutta are misapplied in ways that the Buddha is directly saying don't do it, meaning they use that to justify analyzing all these different themes of the Dhamma and analyzing hindrances rather than direct engagement in the Dhamma. What is the denial of sustenance for developing equanimity as a factor of awakening? Sustenance for the development of equanimity is denied by ignoring the framework and guidance of the Eightfold Path. Again, simple and direct. I thought that was it. That's the end of the Ahara Sutta. Thank you for listening. I hope you found it beneficial. Let's start. There's two folks online. There's Nick, and there's Mary on there. Nick, how are you? Why don't you turn your mic on and tell us what's going on with you today?
I'm fine today. How are you doing today?
Good. Thank you for asking. Did you enjoy the sutta?
Yes, I did. I have a question. Then the question is, how do I identify that I'm not doing something correctly?
Wow. The quick answer, but it's the right answer, is it just really just takes continued right effort, what we talked about here. In fact, in relation to this sutta, you'll be feeding that opportunity a factor of awakening by really just continuing with your Dhamma practice. So, but the specific answer is, and it's just a little, it's an exposition of what I just said. As you continue to develop the framework of the Eightfold Path, you'll be able to see the arising and passing away of that type of phenomena much more clearly. Right now, you're not quite sure about, is this a right way of seeing this or not? But again, I'm encouraging you to continue, because you're headed in the right direction simply by asking that question. Do you have a specific way that this has come up for you?
No, now you put me on the spot. I can't. I'm sure I do. But as soon as you asked me that question, all that went out of my head.
Yeah, it's a common occurrence, Nick, and addressing the hindrances, as we talked about here, and incorporating the Eightfold Path is really the answer to that. And that's all. And it is that simple. So I'm glad you joined us today.
I'm glad I joined too. Thank you. Oh, by the way, everybody, happy Mother's Day.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
Mary, how are you? Wait, unmute your mic. Mary? Hi, Mary. Okay.
Maybe Mary's away from you.
Yeah, she might be. Good to see you, Becky.
Good to be here. Thank you. This was really good for me because it's very easy for me to cease right effort when other things are happening. And I see myself doing it, and I sort of got back in control this week, or my right effort was a little bit more in line with where it should be if I want to develop concentration. And I noticed that it really worked, and that you can't do this without a really strong meditation practice. And that's, for me, that's very difficult at times. But
to maintain the practice?
To maintain, to do the meditation, yes. But this really helped because it made me see how important that is, and made me see how easy it is for me to get the anxiety and the restlessness and have everything sort of come back and feel out of control when I don't meditate. So it's very helpful. And I have one sort of silly question, but in a way it helps me to understand my right mindfulness, or right mindfulness, really, or right view, which is really right mindfulness.
Yeah, it is.
So you say that you have to accept that, you accept things the way they are. You see your dog, sometimes your dog is wonderful, and sometimes he does something that's
Hardly ever.
But sometimes he does something that is pretty not wonderful.
Eating the garbage.
Yeah. But the thing that I almost wanted to ask this question when you said it, and you said something like, you can't always have good smells. Sometimes there's bad smells.
Did I say that in a Dhamma class?
Yes, you did.
Smelly potatoes.
If you're smelly potatoes. So if you, I can't believe I'm asking this. It's such insight into my mind. If you have, say you walk into your house and something smells bad.
It's usually Bodhi, but
it's right. If you're using right view, you don't, oh my God, what is that? I have to find that. I have to end it. I have to get rid of it. You don't do that. But using right view, you can still calmly and with equanimity find out where the smell is coming from and take the garbage out.
Yeah, if that's what's called for.
So there you go. So it's not that you just have to keep smelling the smell because that's what's happening. It's that you
That's great.
you don't get attached to changing what's happening.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, that's great insight. Both of your themes there. That right view in that situation simply prevents you from reacting in a foolish way and creating stress for yourself.
Exactly.
You open the door, there's a smell, find out what it is, and get rid of it. I mean,
Exactly.
and
Okay.
without trying to place blame for. By the way, this is really true. Bodhi's never gone in the house. Sad to say, because he listens to these things and he'd be upset.
Well,
Rather than open a door and it stinks, and immediately your mind might go, if it's a conditioned reactive mind,
this is my
who's to
fault.
blame?
Yeah.
Who left something?
Yes.
Yeah.
Why did the dog? Why do I have a dog? Or
Yeah.
why am I so lazy that I forgot to take? Blah 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 blah. And all of that is a speculated view that hopes to establish something that's not there. Meaning blame for a smell. It doesn't change the fact that the smell is there. Boy, this is really probably could have
Also, it's
had a different
drama.
topic to
Yeah,
to
that's
point out.
smell's
A
gonna
loose
go
tile
away.
in the bathroom or something. Pardon me?
It's also drama because the smell is impermanent.
Oh yeah,
It's going to go away.
yeah.
So am I dying because it's smelly? I'm not dying. I'm
And we can take
Yeah.
that and
I'm
apply
okay.
that to everything in the world that we find starts agitating us.
Exactly.
We might hear something on the news that we would normally react to, but because we now are in control of our mind, we can hear the same thing and maybe even come to the same conclusions, but we don't have to react to it. And today we don't have to react with hatred. We just are mindful of what's occurring. And that's what the Buddha is talking about. It's not, there's nothing magical or mystical or anything about this. It's a way of living in the world moment by moment with understanding and a peaceful and calm mind. Isn't that worth every effort? To me, it is.
It is.
No matter what. I mean, we spend a lot of time getting things and practical things, getting food, shelter, medicine, and clothes. We all have to. The Buddha said we needed those things. But we tend to go overboard on those things and dismiss the things that are most important. That's where joyful engagement in the Dhamma comes in, isn't it? Because we know we're getting so much out of this. Great insight. Thank you. Jen, good to see you.
That's good to see you. This was helpful because it sort of clicked for me that really the hindrances, like what is underlying the hindrances, is craving and clinging. And that is something you can just abandon or act in spite of. And I see, I recognize the hindrances in myself a lot. And I would say recently I've really recognized craving for sensual experiences, and then kind of getting frustrated with seeing it.
Yeah.
So the recognition is there, but like the abandoning is like where I would get stuck, and it would kind of churn. The abandonment or the recognition of craving and clinging would kind of turn into like a churning analysis and ruminating kind of
And
process
now you're attached to it again.
going on in my mind, and just like a general like a very subtle tension, and kind of not really even fully seeing the thought process that was leading to the tension, but knowing, like recognizing just that there was that tension there, and that alone being enough to say, oh wow, there's something going on here, but I can't really identify it. But I don't need to identify it. I just need to like, this is not me. This is not mine. This is not myself. And then but that's been like all day. It's like all the time. It's like that this is not me. This is not mine. This is not myself. Is something that's like coming up as there's an opportunity to remind myself, this is not me, this is not mine, this is not myself, often.
So you have a great opportunity to practice.
You don't realize like how often it comes up, and it's, you know, even if it's just like subtle, there's this opportunity all the time to just go, oh wow, I'm you know, craving, feeling again, and what's wrong with me? Or what? This is not me. This is not mine. This is not myself. It's like popcorn.
So you're noticing the arising of phenomena,
Right.
but you're not noticing the passing away of phenomena, or at least maybe to say as readily as you would hope.
Right.
In your meditation, you notice your in-breath.
Right.
Do you notice your out-breath as much?
Probably not.
Just think about that going into
So
it.
that was my next question. Yeah. What do you do?
Yeah.
How do you cultivate that? Like
that aspect of right meditation,
Mhm.
both aspects are an experience of impermanence, aren't they? The arising of phenomena and the diminishing of phenomena, the passing away. So when you're mindful of both your in-breath and your out-breath, you're literally being mindful of the nature of impermanence in your breath.
Mhm.
And I think you'll start noticing the connection to
Gotcha.
abandoning phenomena,
Yeah.
or letting it, maybe the better way is to allow it to pass away.
Right.
Because you're now connecting that thought to the breath cycle. But that's really what the whole point of the in-breath and the out-breath. And excuse me. And I want to say, I'm not implying that you've been meditating incorrectly.
Oh, no. Yeah.
This is a way of deepening that
Right.
understanding of what you've been developing, because it's in that out-breath that phenomena passes away.
So that's what my next question actually was what do you do when you recognize that you know you're in it in a subtle, you recognize that you're craving and clinging, and but you answered the question is that I'm really not just watching that passing away.
You're not being mindful of the whole cycle.
Right,
So
right.
another way that we can kind of get stuck in our Dhamma practice by reminding ourselves to come back to the breath. But when we are stressed or afraid, what kind of breath do we take?
Yeah.
And so we can inadvertently incorporate that type of breathing into we've trained ourselves well to come back to the breath during a stressful situation, but yet we forget to take that full breath. So if something happens, I'm busy in my day. Oh, wait, that crazy old bald guy said take a breath. But we only take that breath. We don't take a full breath often. We don't even realize it. So if you're going to take a breath to bring yourself back in the moment, be mindful of the full breath, the in-breath and the out-breath. You'll see that. It'll help greatly. And this is, again, you're talking about getting to very subtle levels of integrating the Dhamma in that way. Good for you. Thank you. Mary, good to see you. How are you?
Be here. I'm doing well.
Good.
Again, I fall off the wagon in terms of meditation, but invariably when I'm having a really stressful time, I just say, go sit your butt down, meditate, and realize that I do need to stick with this because it's just helpful in coping in general. It is extremely helpful. All of the Buddhist lessons are just so, the way he worded things, and even the way they translated them, because they were obviously very careful in translating them, because it talks around in a circle, and it's the same thing said 50,000 different ways, and if you look at it, you realize that he's still saying the same thing. He's just saying it a lot of different ways, and it gives you a lot of chances to get it.
Yeah.
And it really is pretty phenomenal.
It is. It's remarkable. Thank you. Glad you're here. Kevin, good to see you. How are you?
Good. to you too. Very well, thank you.
Good.
And well, this is, it's a great teaching. I'm reminded twice a day that the hindrances are ever present. Because every time I sit, they're there. They come up, thoughts arise, feelings, and then you get into, the whole cycle. And then if I'm fortunate, I think I can do jhana, and then I can actually get into a deeper concentration and I can let it go. But there are many times, sometimes a week on end, where the hindrances are just relentless and they're there. But then I can bring my mindfulness back to my breathing. I might do 2 breaths, I might do 1.5, and then I'm gone again. But they are ever present. Yeah. And I think, it's good to be aware of them, and this teaching is a great way to learn how to starve them. And how to,
and what you're doing to feed them, to sustain them.
Yeah. With craving.
Yeah.
With craving.
Yeah, again, very powerful but simple, direct teachings. And there's nothing that I've ever come across, and I've read a lot of the Buddhist teachings now, that were not possible for the average Joe to do. The Buddha doesn't ask us to do anything that's even extraordinary, unless you want to think that a well-concentrated mind is extraordinary, and I guess it is in today's world, but it's not extraordinary as far as having to develop it, is it? But you just have to do it. Great class. There'll be no Saturday class next Saturday because we'll be on retreat. And there won't be a Thursday night, but we will have a class on Tuesday. So that's it. Let's finish with metta as we always do. The Karaniya Metta Sutta, the Buddha's words on metta. This is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace. Let them be able and upright, straightforward and gentle in speech, humble and not conceited, contented and easily satisfied, unburdened with duties, and frugal in their ways, peaceful and calm and wise and skillful, not proud or demanding in nature. Let them not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove. Wishing, in gladness and in safety, may all beings be at ease. Whatever living beings there may be, whether they are weak or strong, omitting none, the great or the mighty, medium, short, or small, the seen and the unseen, those living near and far away, those born and to be born, may all beings be at ease. Let none deceive another or despise any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another. Even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child, so with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings. Radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outwards and unbounded, freed from hatred and ill will. Whether standing or walking, seated or lying down, free from drowsiness, one should sustain this recollection. This is said to be the sublime abiding. By not holding to fixed views, the pure-hearted one, having clarity of vision, being freed from all sense desires, is not born again into this world. Thank you all for a wonderful class this morning. Thanks for joining, Mary. Peace.